All right. Well, good morning and welcome to the 2021 virtual Tillamook County Children's Clean Water Festival. Thank you everyone for joining us this morning. My name is Alix-Lee Tigner. I am the coordinator for Tillamook Estuaries, or the education coordinator for Tillamook Estuaries Partnership. And I'm going to be one of your main presenters today. And with me is Bruce Cardin, our education events assistant.
Hey.
Hi, Bruce.
Hi, Alex. Yeah, I'm Bruce Cardin, and I'll be managing the chat. So if you have questions, you can send them in. We'll answer most of them at the end. But right now, we're just going to have some good information coming your way from Alex.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is the first day of, oops. Go ahead and, so before we begin everything, I just wanted to run through a few things. So you won't be able to see yourselves or use your microphones during this webinar presentation. And that's because we do have students and teachers from all over Tillamook County joining us today. So we could have a lot of people on. So Bruce and I will be the only ones that have our videos and our microphones. But you will be able to interact with us through the chat, which is what Bruce is managing. So you can go ahead and send your questions to us in the chat. We will have a Q&A session at the end where we go back through and answer any questions that were specific to the activity or any of the information that we covered. So go ahead and send your questions as they come up, and we'll try and keep track of them. And then if anything specific comes up with questions along with the activity, we'll try and answer them as we go along. Otherwise, we will be able to share some of the questions that we're getting in the chat at the end. And we're also the only ones that are able to see the chat. So you're communicating with just Bruce and I. Your other students aren't able to see that. So this session is being recorded, and it will be available on our Children's Clean Water Festival webpage, which is at www.tbnep.org soon. We'll hopefully get it up today or early tomorrow morning for you to review or check it out at your own time. And don't forget to also visit that website, because it is where we are hosting our online exhibit hall with additional videos and activities that you can do all about clean water and how it relates to our environment, different habitats and animals, and ourselves. That's available also online at our website, www.tbnep.org. So don't forget to check that out. It'll be updated regularly throughout the month of March with lots of new information from our partners. Right now, I think we've got 3 activities up there for you to do, all about beavers, pinnipeds or seals and sea lions, and seabirds. So some really fun animal activities on our website right now for you to check out. So we're going to dive right into our first presentation here, which is called Crumple Watershed. So today, it's only me and Bruce on this call today, or on this webinar today. And tomorrow, Bruce will be presenting another activity all about fishy adaptations. Then next week, we'll have guests from Twin Rocks Friends Camp and the Jackson Bottom Wetlands, doing some other fun activities for you. And this is Chrissy Smith from the Friends of Netarts Bay Webs also helped with this presentation today. So first of all, what is a watershed? So a watershed is the area of land that drains rainfall and snowmelt to rivers, lakes, bays, and oceans. Everyone here lives in a watershed here in Tillamook County. There's a number of different watersheds that we'll get to take a look at in a little bit. But everyone in the world lives in a watershed. So there's different features of a watershed, including precipitation, where that rainfall and snowmelt comes down, Our watersheds are divided by mountain ridges, and that keeps the water flowing from one direction or another. The water flows into tributary streams, which are the small streams at the top of watersheds that flow into larger rivers. And those small streams are organized into what we call sub-watersheds, so smaller little watersheds that all drain to a same point. Some of our rivers and lakes drain into different lakes, and the water collects there. And eventually, all the water from our mountains drains out to bays and into the ocean. So what do the watersheds here in Tillamook County look like? This is going to play about a minute-long video so you can see what the different watersheds look like. Before I play the video, I just want to remind everyone, you don't have your cameras or your microphones, so it's just me on here right now and Bruce when he chimes in. So you can go ahead and send any questions into the chat. I've seen a few people raise hands, so if you do have a question, make sure you type it in the chat and we'll try and respond directly, or we will answer your questions during the Q&A session at the end.
I only see the screen she's sharing. I think she stopped sharing the screen for... Stop sharing her screen for us to see her, so don't worry about that.
Okay. All right, let's go ahead and get this little video started. Well, it's just river sounds, so that's okay. Oops. I'm sorry you couldn't hear the sound on that video. It was only just sounds of water. So if you happen to watch it again, you can use your imaginations to hear that sound of flowing water. So let's take a closer look at the watersheds here in Tillamook County. Tillamook County has 5 major watersheds. And that includes areas that are outside the county, like the Nehalem River, which flows through and down into Tillamook County. Tillamook County is a little bit like shaped like this. But there are 5 major watersheds here in Tillamook County. The first one at the north end of the county is called the Nehalem Watershed. And it is 855 square miles, which means that it covers this whole area from the tops of the mountains up here, all the way back towards Saddle Mountain, to the south and the east, and down to the Nehalem Bay. The Nehalem River curves around the Coast Range Mountains, all these mountains, for more than 118 miles before it drains into Nehalem Bay, which is here. This river is the longest river in the Coast Range. So from Astoria, well, from Warrenton all the way down to the south end of Oregon in Brookings, this watershed is the longest river. And the cities of Nehalem and Wheeler lie near Nehalem Bay. So this is Nehalem here, and this is Wheeler here. So if you live in this area, which is like, this is the Moeller area and the Nehalem Valley, all the way out to Highway 53, that area is part of the Nehalem Watershed, and you live in the Nehalem Watershed. Just south of us, where Bruce and I currently are located, is the Tillamook Bay Watershed. And so here's Garibaldi, Tillamook Estuaries Partnership office is actually right here. And that's where we're broadcasting from today. So the Tillamook Bay Watershed is a little bit smaller at 597 square miles. But there are 5 major rivers that come into the Tillamook Bay. They are the Tillamook, the Trask, Wilson, Kilchis, and Miami rivers. Tillamook Bay, the bay that you're seeing right here, is the 2nd largest estuary in Oregon. The Columbia River estuary is actually the largest, so that's a huge watershed. And so it's pretty outstanding that we have one of the 2nd largest estuary here in Oregon. And an estuary is where the water from the land that you're seeing come down here in rivers meets water from the ocean and mixes in this area called an estuary. So the cities of Garibaldi here and Bay City over here and Tillamook down here surround the bay. So if you live in those areas, or if you live in the surrounding farming communities, you live in the Tillamook Bay Watershed. And our next watershed is the Netarts Watershed. And this is much closer out onto the ocean and is a much smaller watershed at only 19 square miles. Netarts Bay is fed by 14 perennial streams, and perennial means that they only flow during certain times of the year. So in the summertime, when water gets lower, we don't always have fresh water flowing into Netarts Bay. And because of that, Netarts Bay is one of the saltiest estuaries on the coast, because most of the water that you have in the bay is coming in from the ocean with the tides. So the town of Netarts lies near the bay and is the only community in the watershed. So if you live in Netarts or in one of these little surrounding areas, you're in the Netarts watershed. The Sand Lake Watershed is a little bit further south and is another one of our small watersheds. Oops. So Sand Lake is fed, so I think it said, I missed that one. I think it said it's 14 square miles. It's fed by only 2 creeks, so it has a very minimal amount of fresh water coming in from the hills here. And you can see why it's called Sand Lake, because it's got a lot of sand in its estuary, in its bay. So the small watershed is also characterized by these really big dune habitats, which is kind of unique to this area. And the communities of Sand Lake over here and Tierra del Mar down south lie near the bay. So if you live in that area, you live in the Sand Lake watershed. And then our furthest south major watershed is the Nastucka Watershed. His watershed size is kind of in the middle at 340 square miles. The Nastucka and Little Nastucka rivers flow into the Nastucka Bay Estuary. So here's the estuary, here's one river coming in, and here's the other river coming in. And they meet right here where the estuary kind of starts. The communities of Pacific City and Woods, so here's Pacific City down in this corner, lie near this Nastucka Bay. And then Neskowin Creek, which is further down south, is also part of this major watershed, part of the Nastucka Watershed, except for the fact that it goes directly into the ocean right here near what's called Proposal Rock. So if you live in the communities of Pacific City or Woods or near Neskowin, you live in the Nastucka Watershed. And Neskowin Creek is then a sub-watershed of the Nastucka Estuary, or this Nastucka Watershed. So if you want to learn more about watersheds, Tillamook Estuaries Partnership and Friends of Netarts Bay Webs are launching a series of fun short videos called Nature Notes soon on Facebook and Instagram. So you can grab an adult and check out our Facebook or our Instagram pages to learn more about watersheds and other really cool natural facts and follow along there. But for now, we are going to make our own watersheds. So what you'll need, so I'm going to switch my share over. Oops. So you're actually seeing my hands and the activity that I'm going to be doing. And you should be able to see my face here too while I'm talking. So what you'll need, you'll have your packets, or if you were able to print out your packets, or if you're following along online, you'll have this information that was available. We sent it out, or it's on our website. And there's an activity in here called Crumple Watershed. So it has all the instructions for you there, but I'll go through them as well. And then you'll want to remove the sheet of blue paper or the cardstock for this activity. You'll want to have a sheet of blank white paper. You also need your set of markers and either the sticky dots that you got, if you got the set, or a little bit of tape for this activity. And you're also going to want a small cup of water. Here's my cup of water. So first of all, we're going to start out by writing our names on the back of our blue paper or cardstock. There's my name. I'm going to flip it over, and then I'm going to take my sheet of white paper. And if you don't have your supplies in front of you, you know, this video will be uploaded to our website, and you can always do it later and just sit back and watch while we're working on it today. So the next step I'm going to do is take my white paper and I'm going to crumple it loosely. So I'm going to just kind of crumple it a little bit, not too much. You don't want to have too much crumpled there. You see how it creates kind of all these ridges and high points and low points? That's really good. So not too crumpled, just a little bit crumpled, and then I'm going to let it spread out, but maintain those ridges and high points. Then I'm going to take my sticky dots, which are sticky on both sides, I promise. And you separate, I'm going to stick the one side to my blue paper that's sticky, and then try and peel off that other side, which is a little bit more difficult. But then there's like a clear little dot there. And I'm going to stick one corner of my white paper there. I'm going to kind of keep my watershed, my levels there. And I'm going to do that 4 times in each of the corners. And it might be easier to do it by attaching the dot to the white paper first and then peeling off that backing and sticking it to our blue paper. Again, kind of trying to maintain some of those ridges as I do it. And I'm going to do it quickly, a couple more times to get all of that. And one last one. I still have a few of those big ridges on my paper. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my markers and I'm going to select kind of a darker color. I'm actually going to go with brown. I like that color for this aspect of it. And the first thing I'm going to do on this page is I am going to color the tops of those ridge lines. So here, where it's really high points on my piece of paper, I'm going to give those a little bit of a brown coloring. And I'm going to do this quickly. It doesn't have to be a perfect piece of artwork, and you can do this along with me. And you can also take your time and continue doing this after we're done here today. I'm going to do it a little bit quickly so that we can make sure we talk about the whole activity. So I just have a few little spots that I've colored in with that brown on the tops of my ridges. You can see those are the high points. And then I'm going to take a blue marker And I'm going to fill in the low points and the spots where I think that if these were mountains, that the water would flow off of them and down into the valleys and form lakes and streams. So I'm going to start at those low points here. So I've got a big one right here. I'm just going to color and start as a big lake. And then I'm going to go up this valley towards my ridge lines, towards the top here. And then I see that there's another one here that I'm going to go down, fill in some of these areas. And this is where I think that if this were a real watershed, I think water would flow down these areas because they're lower than some of my high spots. So go ahead and fill in the spots on yours, where you think water might flow off of those mountains. That's a really steep one, down to a nice low point. And this is kind of like a bay. I can take it all the way out to the edge of my paper. So it looks like the water might be flowing into the ocean over on this side. Really do that a little bit more. This side looks like we might get a good lake right here too. Maybe another little bay out to the ocean. Okay, once you're done coloring with your blue marker, you can take your green marker and we're going to fill in some of these areas that are the sides of the mountains or grassy areas. So just real quick, I'm going to color in some of my sides of my mountains. This could represent grass or trees or just the sides of those mountains as they come down and meet some of our rivers. Technical difficulties. There we go. You can see, I think you can see it even better now, actually. Keep going, color in those nice green slopes. I'm not doing, you know, trees can be patchy. This is just to really get some color on my paper. This is a really big old grassy knoll over here. It definitely does not have to be perfect, because you know what? We're going to drip a little water on this in a minute. It's going to change the way it looks. Okay. So the last thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to choose a purple marker. I like this marker. And I'm going to draw some other features that I might see in a watershed. So one of the things that you might see in the watershed is along a river, you might have some houses. I'm going to draw some houses real quick. They're definitely not perfect. They're just little representations of houses and maybe even more. Because I think this looks like a good little place on a flat spot to draw a town. There I've got some houses. And over here, let's put, you know, the folks from those houses really like to drive over here. So I'm going to put a road over here across this mountain. Kind of comes over. There'll be a bridge here since we're crossing the water. Goes over this hilltop and back over to the town. All right, so now I have my drawing of a watershed. I'm going to give it a little squeeze to get those ridges up high again in case when you were coloring it might have gotten flat. That's okay. We can squeeze it and get it up high again. And the last thing I'm going to do with my Crumple Watershed, here's kind of a, oops. Another way that it looks with my houses and stuff is I'm going to take my little cup of water. I'm going to dip my fingers into this cup of water so that they get drippy. And I'm going to drip some of my water onto my watershed like it would rain. And I'm going to drip it from the tops of my mountains down. And you can give it a little bit extra. You can also do this with a spray bottle if you have a spray bottle. I'm just gonna act like we're getting some good little rainstorms throughout here. And as I'm doing this, I'm watching where is the water pooling or kind of collecting. Like right here, I seem to be getting a lot of water. And oh, let's do it on this side so we can see how it goes out, where it goes, and if it goes into the ocean there. When I scrunched it, I got a little bit of a different effect here on this side. And let's see what happens when we drip it directly on the town. So you can really see now, as there's water on my watershed, where the water is pooling in these areas like rivers and lakes, how it's flowed off mountainsides. My town has really kind of gotten a little bit stuff. So if it were to rain on my town, it looks like stuff from the town might be actually going into the water. And so when we look at this, we can really see how that water collects on our ridge tops and flows down into these separate little watersheds. So now using this, what you observed as you drip the water on it, there's a packet, or there's a next page in your packet that has questions that you can answer using what you observed in this activity. So things like, how did the rainfall travel over your land? Where did the water collect? And then you can, once you're, as your watershed dries, you can go through and you can name your lakes and your mountains and your streams, and you can kind of trace how it went. And in this last little space here, you can draw a picture of your watershed and label those streams and lakes. So I'm going to switch my share again. And you can keep working on that after we're done here, but we're going to switch into our Q&A session real quick since we are coming up right on 10:30. So if you have to go, that's okay. We understand. But go ahead and type your questions into the chat. Bruce is going to ask me some of those questions. And then I'm going to go ahead and we're going to go ahead and try and answer them for you. And remember that this recording will be up on our website and that you can check out our exhibit hall online at www.tebnep.org. And that little thing is your teachers will have access to that as well. So Bruce, you want to come on and ask me some questions?
There we go. Yeah. So one of the questions, and I thought it's a really basic one, is why do we do this festival? How come we do the Clean Water Festival? And I thought that's
really
a good one.
Question. We should do a whole video on Clean Water Festival and what it is. So we do it because we recognize that everything, all life depends on having clean water. And that includes people, it includes animals, and it includes all of our habitats. And so we do this festival so that we can help our students throughout Tillamook County learn more about how clean water affects us and why we depend on it and how important it is to kind of keep it protected and clean. And throughout this online festival, you're going to learn more about water itself. So next week we'll have one about an activity about the water cycle. We'll have different activities about what animals depend on clean water. And at the very end of this festival, we're going to talk about some ways that you can help keep the water in your area clean. That was a great question. Thank you.
Yeah. And then another one is a student said, I live in Rockaway. Does that count as a watershed?
Oh, Rockaway is a watershed. Yes, it is kind of like a sub-watershed, and it's one of those ones like Nastucka Creek that flows directly into the ocean rather than into a bay or estuary. So part of Rockaway's watersheds are all those lakes, like Lake Lytle. And there are streams that come off of the mountains behind Rockaway and flow into those lakes, and they go there, and then they go directly under the highway and out those creeks into the ocean. So it's a little more of a constricted, smaller watershed, but it's still a watershed. And it's actually, I think that Rockaway is considered part of the Tillamook Bay Watershed. It's a sub-watershed of that, even though those rivers don't flow into Tillamook Bay.
Okay, good. Somebody wants to know, what's the biggest watershed?
Ooh, the biggest watershed. Well, so in the United States, the biggest watershed is the Mississippi watershed. And that is because it includes a bunch of sub-watersheds like the Missouri River, which flows through Montana, which is where I'm from originally. And it flows all throughout a good number of states and all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico and empties into there. And I don't know off the top of my head how big that watershed is, but it's a really big one. The biggest watershed in Oregon would be the Columbia River watershed. And that includes the Snake River over in Eastern Oregon and part of Idaho. And the Columbia River actually goes all the way up into Canada, or part of the watershed actually goes up into Canada. And so that's another huge watershed. The largest watershed in Tillamook County would be the Nehalem watershed.
So this couple of questions are related. One is, why does the water pile up in one spot? But that actually goes into, why do we have lakes, rivers, and oceans?
Right. So that's a really good question. And so when we did our activity, that water flowed and kind of rolled down the high spots, right? Our high spots are our mountains. And it comes down off the side and it hits a really low spot. And in a lot of those areas, that low spot kind of forms like, trying to figure out how to do that. Like
that works.
So something like almost like a bathtub or a sink. So that if you were to, don't do this at home, but imagine if you were to have like a bucket and you were to flow water into it, the water is going to stay in that bucket until it reaches the top and sides because it's kind of contained in this basin. And so our lakes kind of act like that. They are deeper and lower than the areas around them. Same with our rivers. And so the water fills in those areas until it reaches a spot like another creek outlet where it would then flow out. And if you have enough water coming in constantly, like you do with a river flowing into a lake, that lake maintains its water level. And then you have water coming out of another end. So like in Lake Lytle, you have water coming off those mountains all the time, flowing in and filling up those lakes, and then going, once it reaches a certain level, it flows out those creeks and down into the beach, into the estuary, or to the ocean.
Good. This one is, can different watersheds connect?
So we can have sub-watersheds. So yes, so watersheds are, a single creek itself can be a watershed because it drains that area around it. But then that creek flows into different larger rivers. And then eventually the water makes its way to the ocean. But something like the Nehalem watershed can't connect to the Tillamook watershed because of these mountain ridges that we have between the two that create boundaries, so that if water falls on one side of the mountain, say this side, it's all going to flow this side into that watershed. But if it flows on this side of the mountain, because of gravity, it's all going to flow on this side. So we do have separations, but there are smaller levels of watersheds within big watersheds.
So that somebody asked, what's the smallest watershed? And I think that probably covers like little creeks and stuff.
Yeah.
So wherever the water flows.
Yeah, wherever water flows. So there's this at the end of that video that I played, the very end of it, and you might not remember, but there is this waterfall coming off of Cape Meares and flowing directly into the ocean. And that is a tiny little watershed within itself. Because it's so restricted and the ocean is right there, that the water is just coming off of Cape Meares down out near Bay Ocean. And and flowing directly into the ocean from that spot. So that's a really tiny watershed. So anything that would flow immediately and directly into the ocean would be a tiny little watershed. And we have a lot of those. They just, the creeks that flow through there's some little small streams that flow through Manzanita and things like that, and those flow directly into the ocean and are considered really little watersheds themselves. That's
actually related to this next one. It says, how many watersheds are there in Oregon? There's a whole lot.
There are a whole lot. It would depend on that's a really good question. So it would depend on what level of watershed that you look at. So if we look at these really big watersheds like the Nehalem and the Tillamook, man, I don't actually know the numbers on that. We might have to look that up, Bruce, and then share that.
Sure.
And there's some pretty good resources online that you can look up to learn more about watersheds and which watershed that you happen to live in. But they're divided by different levels, so it depends on which level that we look at.
So this one student has desperately asked me this a couple of times, is Seaside a watershed?
Seaside is part of a watershed. Seaside is part of the Nastucka Watershed. So you have two streams that flow through Seaside, the Nastucka, two big creeks, I guess, and the Neawanna. I think it's the Neawanna. And they meet right at the little estuary at the in Seaside, at the north end of Seaside, kind of near the high school. It's a little bit past the high school. And so Seaside is part of the Nastucka estuary, and it kind of goes as you're driving out Highway 26, you drive by the Nastucka River for a little while. So that's part of your watershed too, is that Highway 26 and the Nastucka as it comes into Seaside and then heads north up to where it empties into the ocean. It's got a pretty small estuary there, but it's still a really beautiful watershed.
Our gallant leader, Claudine, says there's 59 large watersheds in Oregon.
59. Thank you, Claudine, for helping us answer that question. And 59 large watersheds, and each of those really big watersheds is going to have subsets of small watersheds within themselves. But those 59 would be that they have a major water stream or river or creek that flows either directly to the ocean or probably into the Columbia River. Yeah, most of that's pretty much where our watersheds go.
And then we're looking at the time frame. Let's make this our last question. Do watersheds always go into the ocean?
So you can have some that stop. One good example would be like Salt Lake in the middle of Utah. It does not have an outflow into the ocean, but most waterways would flow eventually into the ocean. So if you have things like, ours are pretty small watersheds and the rivers aren't very long because we're right on the ocean, so it gets there very quickly. But if you look at something like the Columbia River, that goes hundreds and hundreds of miles, you have small little streams flowing from different areas all into that same river. So that would include things like the Snake River, as well as other tributaries and those small streams are called tributaries that are all flowing into it. But eventually, all that water does make it out into the ocean.
Cool. Well, we've got a couple more questions, but I'm looking at our time frame. We told people we'd be finished about 10:30 and it's 10:40 now. So tune in tomorrow and same time, I will be doing the presentation on fishy art. There's an art contest and you're going to need to know some information. Your packet should have been supplied to you by your teachers and you should have them handy. Hopefully that you can look around. If you couldn't find your packet today, there are some questions that are there that are going to be important, but more importantly is getting the information, a little bit of writing. So we're looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. Anything else from you, Alex?
I think that's everything. Yeah, and if you don't have your packet, you can download it from our website, our Clean Water Festival webpage at www.tbnep.org. This will be packet number 1, and it's separated by activities. So you can have, if you just look for the fishy adaptations, you should see where you can download packet number 1. And that'll have all the information that you'll need in it for tomorrow's lesson. And you'll be able to watch this or tomorrow's lesson online too, if you're not able to join us for it live. Thanks everyone so much for joining us for our first day of Children's Clean Water Festival. It was wonderful getting to interact with you and to, we wish soon that we'll be able to see you in person, and next year we'll definitely get to have Plain Water Festival. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Bye.